Some boring, but also some interesting testimony in the Michelle Troconis trial. So we're going to jump into some of the very interesting legal issues that came up, some of the rulings that happened and the basis behind that. We're going to jump into all that. And of course, with us, it's always exciting. It's always interesting what's going on. But we're just going to quickly give you an overview of what's been going on so far with the Michelle Troconis trial, catch you up to speed so you don't have to sit through 24 hours of the trial itself. And then you'll be completely caught up. And then we're going to give you some exciting, interesting legal analysis about some of the issues that came up. So we had the first few days, which is really the detectives, the police, who came down to the scene and marked all the pieces of evidence, looked at the different pieces of blood, and they went through all that boring stuff, really just laying the foundation for what's going to be coming next. Okay, so they went, they marked it down, they got the body cam footage in, they got that to show that to the jury. All right, all that boring stuff is over. Then they actually called the nanny, Lauren Almeida. So Lauren Almeida has been the nanny there for a bunch of years, since I think 2012. And she became very close with Jennifer Dulos. She became very close with her. She was always there, always with the children, and they confided in each other. And not only that, but she also at some point became closer with Fotis, because she actually ended up working for Fotis in his company. And she, at some point, even looked up to him as a mentor before she, I guess, saw his true colors. So she was really becoming very close with his family, but especially close with Jennifer. And then in March 2017, they take a trip to Florida, where they're going to be going water skiing. Apparently, Fotis was a very competitive water skier, and he was training his children also to be water skiers, and they had a private club there where they used to go water skiing. And that's what was the purpose of their trip to Florida in 2017. Well, while they're down there, Jennifer is confiding in Lauren, and she tells Lauren that she really has this feeling that Fotis is cheating on her. She just has this feeling, and they're confiding in each other. And initially, Lauren actually didn't believe that Fotis would cheat on her, because she, at that point, they were working together, and she felt that he was a mentor. She felt that he was an upstanding individual that would never do such a thing. So she was surprised by the whole idea, but they still spoke about it. And at some point during that trip, Jennifer actually had to leave early. She had to leave early because her mother hurt herself, and she had to fly back to Connecticut. And so she was going back to take care of her mother. And at the same time, Fotis was staying in Florida with Lauren Almeida and the children. And then Lauren says that at some point, one of the nights that they were all staying together in the same hotel, in the W Hotel in Miami, at some point, Fotis tells Lauren that for one night, she actually has to go and stay in a different hotel with the kids. And he checks them into the Ritz-Carlton. That's a downgrade from the W. And they're in the Ritz-Carlton for one night. And for whatever reason, and the only reason that Fotis gives is that a friend is coming over to stay with him. Now, of course, that's all she knows. She doesn't know who came over, or if it was a man, or if it was a woman. But again, the suggestion here is going to be that, that's what he was doing. He was cheating with her, and it was probably Michelle Troconis. Anyway, so they get back after that trip in March 2017. They come back to Connecticut, and that's again when Jennifer is confiding in Lauren and says, "I have proof. I know for sure that he's cheating on me." And they're discussing what she's going to do with that information. And Jennifer says she's going to confront him, and they're going to have a discussion. And she's hoping that it will still be able to work out, that everything will be worked out, everything will be fine. We'll just work through it. Some couples will do that. We have a bunch of kids. We can't just give everything up. We're going to work on it. We're going to get past that. But that's not exactly how things worked out. As he was confronted with this information, things just kept spiraling downward, and there just ended up being fights and a lot of marital discord, and that's where everything was headed. And she continues to say that how the relationship deteriorated. We have in April and May 2017, Fotis threatened Jennifer that he's going to take the kids to Greece with him and not come back. And Jennifer felt that she had to move out before she actually serves the divorce papers on Fotis, because she was nervous about what Fotis is going to do to her. She was nervous for her own safety, and therefore she had to leave the house before serving Fotis with divorce papers. Now, there was certain times where Fotis had supervised visitation. At some point he had more custody, but he was ignoring court orders, and therefore custody was taken away from him, and he was only allowed to have supervised visitation only on Wednesdays. Now, what's interesting is that the night before the murder or disappearance of Jennifer, Lauren says that she comes to the house, comes to the house where they moved out to. She moved out with Jennifer ready to this whole house. They snuck out. They kind of snuck out together, and she's at the house the night before the disappearance, and she notices that they're very low on paper towel. So therefore, she goes to the storage room. She brings up a whole package of 12 paper towels and puts them in the pantry. And that's how she leaves it that night. Maybe she used one, but that's how she leaves it that night. And then the next morning, she comes there, and she's supposed to meet Jennifer in New York. Jennifer was supposed to be going to some appointments in New York, and she comes there, and the Range Rover is there, her car is there. So she doesn't think much of it, but she does come into the house, and she notices, one of the things that she notices is that there's the paper towel. There's only 2 paper towels left in the pantry. And she knows that last night, when she left the house, there was 12 paper towel rolls there. So what happened in between? Where did those 10 paper towels go? Now, she didn't think much of it at the time, but again, the suggestion here is that is what Fotis used. That he used 10 paper towels to clean up the mess that he made when he was murdering Jennifer. So she also noticed that her purse was out of place, was on the floor. She would never keep her purse on the floor, Jennifer. She would always keep her purse either in the kitchen somewhere or with her. So on the countertop in the kitchen, or she would take it with her, never on the floor. So that seems strange to her. And she also noticed that the mudroom door to the garage, there's a few, but one of them, which is always locked, was unlocked. For some reason, it was unlocked. So that also suggested that somebody who was not supposed to be there was there. And eventually she went to New York, and eventually she ended up calling the cops. Okay, so what did they do on cross-examination? How can you poke holes into this type of testimony? So they did the best that they could. They mentioned, they brought out a few interesting points. Number one they brought out was that Lauren agreed that this wasn't a typical relationship, a typical marriage that she was used to. She didn't think that this was a normal relationship. He was always away, Fotis. He was always away, and it didn't seem that they connected in a way that many marriages and many married couples do. So it seemed right away that there was something off about this marriage in the first place. Also, aside from him always being away, and that the relationship wasn't so regular in the first place, he also was seen and was very open about his other friends who were women. And he had women friends in Greece, and even Michelle Troconis, they had some pictures of them together with the family and Michelle as part of the pictures. So this was a friend who was part of the pictures. It didn't seem to be like someone he was trying to keep hidden and have an affair with on the side. It seems like Michelle was much more of just a regular family friend than necessarily being somebody who he was in an affair with. He also spoke to Michelle in front of Jennifer a bunch of times. That was also brought out in some of the testimony. And also, very interesting point here, is that they bring out that Jennifer, actually Fotis was in a marriage before he married Jennifer. And in fact, he dated Jennifer while he was still in that first marriage. So exactly what Jennifer is accusing him of doing in their marriage with Michelle Troconis, he actually did with Jennifer when he was still married to his first wife. So number one, right away, it paints Jennifer in a certain type of light, that she is willing to be the person who Fotis was cheating with on his first wife. So that's also number one. But also number two is that maybe it makes the reason why Jennifer would be so suspicious of Fotis because that's exactly what he did with her. So maybe that's why she would be unreasonably suspicious. Maybe that's also a point that they're trying to bring out with that information. Now, also another point of information that they bring out is that really Lauren had very, very little contact with Fotis since 2017. The last real communication or relationship that they really had was in 2017. I mean, obviously a nanny type of relationship, but since 2017, and this disappearance or murder didn't happen until 2019. So they're saying you don't know what happened for 2 years. You completely, basically lost touch with him, lost contact with him. So, whatever you're saying, it's just 2 years before any of this happened. So it's just so remote in time. So that was some of the things that they brought out. Now, then we had also Detective Patton testified, And he said that he downloaded some of the information from the phone. He noticed that some of the information on the phone, the location puts Fotis's phone by Albany Avenue in Hartford, which I believe in Albany, that's where he was. There was someone putting stuff in garbage cans over there, trying to discard some of the remnants of whatever happened. So that's something that he also mentioned in his testimony. It's very short, but he mentioned that this was an interesting fact, that he found that Fotis's phone was by Albany on May 24th at 7 p.m. So then we had a whole long day, basically, of the DNA expert, Kristen Maydell, and she basically just said that, yeah, there was some blood. Jennifer's blood was in the garage, and some DNA of Jennifer was by the handle by the sink, and also by the Range Rover. A lot of that blood was absolutely Jennifer's DNA, and also there was some DNA that came back positive for Fotis around that area. So Fotis also was in that area, and also Jennifer's blood or DNA was by the Suburban as well. Okay, so that's basically where we left off. That's basically the overview of this case. Now, let's get into some of the interesting issues that came up during this trial. So when Lauren was testifying about the marital discord, about the fights and the arguments that was going on, she mentioned at one point that Fotis was chasing around Jennifer with this paper that he wanted her to sign, something to do with custody. And he was chasing her around, he was screaming, and it was a very scary time for Lauren to be in the house. She heard this and she was terrified of him. And as this is going on, the defense makes an objection. And there's a few bases for the objection. So first, let's play you the back and forth, and then we'll analyze it.
So I was driving through and pulling into the garage, and as I was doing that in their backyard patio, I saw Fotis kind of chasing Jennifer with this piece of paper.
Objection, Your Honor.
Ground.
Same grounds, Your Honor. Prior bad acts related to Fotis Dulos, relevance as to Michelle Troconis.
Well, the grounds has to be, you're stating two grounds. You're stating prior bad acts, and you're stating relevance.
Yes, Your Honor.
Overruled on relevance. Concerning prior bad acts, counsel, do you wish to be heard?
Well, Judge, I would just indicate that I can do the proffer now if the court wants, or we can do it at sidebar.
Well, prior bad acts are not admissible to prove action and conformity therewith on a particular occasion.
Absolutely. And I will tell the court that that's not the offer from the state. Obviously, everything that we are about to discuss as part of the offer yesterday goes to the tension in their marriage during that time period. So that's the purpose of this offer.
Do you wish to be heard, counsel?
Your Honor, this was heard outside the presence of the jury, and this is one of the things that we discussed, and my objections based on that.
Well, of course, prior bad acts are not admissible to show bad character, criminal tendencies, or propensity, but they are admissible to show other things. And so what are you offering it to show, counsel?
Your Honor, we're offering it to show Mr. Dulos' animus, the growing tension in their marriage, and what his intent and motivation was in this particular case.
So intent and malice are grounds on which prior bad acts can be admitted, unless the probative value is outweighed by the danger of unfair prejudice. What is your argument, counsel, on unfair prejudice?
Your Honor, these incidents that are going to be described and that are being described right now involve a very short period of time in 2017. The incident for which we are here today is one that is alleged to have occurred in 2019. The incidents that are being discussed here today involve marital discord involving yelling and disagreements in the context of an impending dissolution of marriage. The charges for which are being brought today involve a conspiracy murder.
So, in other words, your argument, counsel, it appears to the court is that these incidents are too remote in time to essentially give life to intent and malice.
And not similar in nature, Your Honor.
Well, at this point, the testimony is that Fotis was chasing around Jennifer with a piece of paper. So the description of that act as a prior bad act is not evident to the court. Cross-examination is available on what chasing around means. So it's overruled.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's get into what this bad acts is. What are these bad acts? What's this really going on? So really, this all starts with the evidence, and I'm going to pull the rules of evidence straight from the Connecticut Code of Evidence, because after all, we're in Connecticut. So it starts with Section 4-4, and Section 4-4 deals with character evidence. And the general rule is, and I'm going to read it for you, the general rule for character evidence is evidence of a trait of character of a person is inadmissible. So character testimony, character evidence is inadmissible. You're not allowed to admit character evidence for the purpose of proving that the person acted in conformity with the character trait on a particular occasion. So you're not allowed to admit character evidence to prove that that person acted in conformity with that character trait. So if you just want to say, you want to get somebody to testify, and you want someone to testify that the defendant is an angry type of person. That's what type of trait this person has. He's just an angry person. He wakes up angry. He goes to sleep angry. You call him in the middle of the day, he's angry. He's just an angry person. Now, what's the purpose of that testimony? If the purpose of that testimony is to say, well, if he's an angry person, well, it makes much more sense. It's more rational that he would commit this murder. Then it's not admissible. That is not admissible. That's character evidence. Okay, that's where this starts. Now, what about specific acts? So that's just in general. This person is just an angry person in general. So that is not admissible. What about if you want to say a specific act that the person did, or maybe a specific crime that the person did? So you want to say the person's on trial now for murder, but you want to say, well, he also robbed a bank. He robbed a bank a little while ago. So are you allowed to say, bring in evidence of other bad acts or other crimes? So here we go again. This is Section 4-5. And here's the general rule. Evidence of other crimes, wrongs, or acts of a person is inadmissible. Again, it's inadmissible to prove the bad character, propensity, or criminal tendency of that person. So if the only purpose of having testimony that this person committed a certain crime beforehand is to say, well, this is a person whose propensity or whose tendency is to commit crimes, and therefore he most likely committed this murder as well. If that's the purpose of what you're trying to bring in the evidence of his other crimes are, or his other bad acts, here, this is a person that beats his wife. So then it makes more sense. That's his propensity, that's his tendency, so therefore he probably also killed his wife. Or he also probably killed, let's say, just make it easier, he killed a different person. If that's the purpose, just to show that this is a person who commits crimes, his tendency is to commit crimes, and his propensity is to commit crimes, then that's inadmissible. You're not allowed to have that testimony come in either. But there's an exception. There's an exception, right? There's always exceptions. And I just want to quote for you something that my evidence professor, who was a federal judge at the time, he was the chief federal judge of the Eastern District of Michigan, he taught us evidence. And when he was teaching us hearsay, actually, he was actually teaching us hearsay, he put the following quote on the board. Before he even started hearsay, he put the following quote on the board, and I'll never forget it. It's a quote by Oliver Wendell Holmes, and the quote is the following: "The young man knows the rules, but the old man knows the exceptions." And it's a great quote because everybody can know the rules. You can know the rules. It doesn't take that much to know the basic rules, right? Character evidence is inadmissible. Hearsay is inadmissible. You have to authenticate a document. We understand the basic rules. That's not what makes you special. What makes you a good attorney is if you understand the exceptions. If you know the exceptions well, and you know how to get your testimony or your evidence or your exhibit in through an exception, that's what makes you a special lawyer. The young man knows the rules, but the old man knows the exceptions. So, just like we have with character evidence and with bad acts, we also we have exceptions. And that's where this all comes in. So what's the exception? Well, here I'm going to read it for you. When evidence of other crimes, wrongs, or acts is admissible. Evidence of other crimes, wrongs, or acts of a person is admissible for purposes other than those specified in subsection A, which I already just mentioned, such as, so this is when it is admissible, to prove intent, identity, malice, motive, and some other things. So to prove intent or to prove motive. So why would Fotis decide to murder his wife, Jennifer, or his ex-wife? Why would he want to do that? So if I'm bringing in other bad acts to show that that was his motive for doing it, to show that they were going through a very contentious divorce, and that gives him motive, and that shows what his intent is. If his then you can admit these acts, these prior bad acts. So that's the exception. So it's really very important as a lawyer to know before you're going to admit certain pieces of evidence or certain pieces of testimony, what's the purpose that I'm admitting this? And if you can figure out how to put it in your purpose into the exceptions, then that's what makes you a special trial lawyer. That's what makes you a good trial lawyer. And that's what's going on over here. So the objection, so here the prosecution is trying to admit all this marital discord, all this arguments. Why? Not to show that he has the propensity to commit bad acts and therefore he committed the murder. No, they're trying to show that that's why that shows that he had intent to actually murder her and that he had motive to murder her. Oh, now that's why you bring it. So now it actually fits into the exception, and now there's an argument to be made that it should come in. So the judge said that in light of this exception, he's going to allow this evidence in. But we're not done yet. The analysis doesn't end there. Because here's the question is, well, hold on a minute. Okay, so you're now being like an old man who knows the exceptions, and you're trying to get your evidence in through the exception way. But when did this happen? When did this happen? If, let's say you have a person who is in a fight with his friend when they were 14 years old. They got into a skirmish. They were in a fight. And now, 15 years later, one of them ends up dead. And they want to pin the murder on this other person who he fought with when he was 14 years old. So can you go and bring in that prior bad act, that skirmish that they had, that fight that they had, that altercation that they had, and bring that as evidence for something that happened 20 years later? Can you do that? Well, according to the exception, you should be allowed to do that. Well, the answer, of course, is going to be no, because it still has to be somewhat close in time that it makes sense to connect it to. So here, another argument that the defense made is that, Judge, even if you're right, that this technically would be an exception to the bad acts rule, and this could come in because it's proving motive and intent. But this was in 2017. This alleged argument that happened and chasing around with the paper, right? This is even according to Lauren's testimony, this happened in 2017. And the murder allegedly happened in 2019. It's 2 years later. So you're trying to connect something that happened 2 years before to something that happened 2 years later? So number one, the argument back would be, well, it continued. It didn't just end 2017. It continued throughout the time, and that was just one of the arguments that we're bringing up. And the other thing is that, okay, well, I don't know if 2 years is too far away. Who says that 2 years is too remote in time? And actually, if you look in the commentary on these rules, which nobody looks at, but if you look at the commentary on these rules, actually they bring some cases, and some of the cases even say, listen to this. Although the Supreme Court has established no absolute time limit that would bar admissibility of uncharged misconduct, it has suggested that remote prior misconduct must bear a substantial similarity to conduct at issue and be of an aberrant or compulsive nature to be admissible. So the Supreme Court never set a time limit. There is no time limit. It just has to be similar enough that you can connect it to. And then they state a case here, State versus Cha-Young, which there was a 14-year gap. But since there are strong similarities between the two incidents, so it was allowed in. So that's 14 years, and this is only 2 years. So the judge said, even with the argument that this is too remote in time, I'm going to allow this in. But we're not done yet, okay? So in terms of bad acts, yes, it should come in, and 2 years gap between this argument and between the murder is not long enough for us to say that you cannot connect the two. So in terms of this rule, 4-5, it's going to come in for wrong acts. But then the judge said, well, maybe you're going to argue something else. And that's when we get to section 4-3. Okay? So what's section 4-3? Well, we know that only relevant evidence is allowed in to trial, right? It has to be relevant. But not every piece of evidence that's relevant is allowed in, because we have this rule called 4-3. I'm going to read it for you and then I'll explain. Relevant evidence may be excluded if its probative value is outweighed by the danger of unfair prejudice or surprise. And there's some other language here also. Let's just stop there. So even though you may have relevant evidence, but if the danger of unfair prejudice outweighs whatever probative value it's going to have, so let's say you have a piece of testimony or piece of evidence, it's not so probative. It could help a little bit, right? Relevant evidence means that the evidence that has any tendency at all to prove one of the issues in front of the jury. Has any tendency. So even if it's not like I saw him shoot the gun, it can be something that's much more remote than that. But if it has any tendency to help you prove one fact, it's technically considered relevant. Well, under this rule, 4-3, and every single jurisdiction has a rule like this, that even if it's technically relevant, that would fall under relevancy and would be admissible, but if when the jury hears this, they're going to be so prejudiced against the defendant, you're going to turn them completely against the defendant. So then that danger of unfair, it's not fair to have that much prejudice against the defendant, and the amount of value for this piece of evidence coming in is not really that much, then the judge has the right to exclude that evidence. So here, the argument could be made also, the judge is really foreseeing this, and the judge is saying, well, and this is a very thoughtful judge, by the way. I think he's very thoughtful. He's saying, well, maybe you're going to want to argue that this is the danger of unfair prejudice of hearing about all this marital discord outweighs whatever probative value it has to show intent or motive, right, under the exception of the wrong acts or the bad acts. He also said that doesn't think that it's overly prejudicial. But also what the judge did do is that he did limit some of the testimony about the marital discord. He didn't let her go into every single disagreement that they had and every single argument. He let her mention a few things, and then he said, okay, the jury understands that there's marital discord and they're having arguments all the time, but that's enough. We don't have to get more into it. So he did limit it in some way. Anyway, so that was the first issue. Now let's hear about the next issue, which is about the gun. That when Lauren was on the stand, she mentioned something about Fotis buying a gun. So let's take a look at that.
We told the police that a mother of 5 was missing and that she was in a very contentious divorce. And I knew that he had purchased a gun, and so I was afraid. And they were on it right away.
I don't claim that part.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the portion of the testimony that this witness knew Fotis Dulos purchased a gun is stricken. You may not consider it for any reason.
So here we have a situation where the both sides really agreed that this information, this testimony, this evidence that Fotis purchased a gun at some point was not going to come into evidence. And there's probably motions filed, and they both agreed, essentially. They both agreed. The prosecution and the defense agreed that that piece of evidence is not going to come in. Now, the prosecution didn't do anything wrong here. It's not like they led her on to say this. They asked an open-ended question, and Lauren ended up offering the information that, yeah, Fotis bought a gun. But right away, the judge, very strongly, told the jury that they are completely to disregard that entire testimony. That anything to do with the gun, they are to disregard that testimony. Right? And we all just saw that. But here's what happened. The next day, the beginning of trial, I'm not going to have this clip for you, but the next day, in the beginning of trial, you can look it up if you want, but the next day, in the beginning of trial, the defense gets up and says, well, Judge, I just learned something. I learned that the prosecution actually told Lauren that she is not to mention that fact. She's not to mention that. They told her before, don't mention the gun. And then she gets up there and she mentions the gun. So number one, she should be in contempt of court because she was told very clearly by the prosecution that she's not allowed to mention that and she needs to be reprimanded. She needs to be punished some way. That's number one. Number two, the defense moves for a mistrial. So they made a motion for a mistrial. And they said, Your Honor, we know that you gave an instruction to the jury that they should disregard that fact. But they quoted some case law, and some of the case law stands for the proposition that certain things a jury cannot unhear, even if the judge gives them a cautionary instruction. So here the defense is arguing that there should be a completely stop the entire trial, dismiss the jury, we're going to have to start this whole trial over again. Because once the jury hears that Fotis bought a gun, that's it. They're not going to be able to unhear that. They're not going to be able to disregard that. It's going to play on their sympathies too much. It's going to get them too riled up. And they're not going to be able to ignore it, and it's going to affect the way that they deliberate, and they're not going to be able to see the evidence properly. And there's reasons why that was not supposed to come in, and now that it is coming in, it's not allowed to come in, and therefore we're making a motion for a mistrial. Now the judge responded that he had no way of anticipating that this was going to be what Lauren was going to testify about. And in fact, in the defense's motions in limine, the defense did not make a mention that there may be a witness that will talk about the gun, and we're making a motion in limine not to allow that evidence in. They didn't say that. They said much more generally that they made a motion in limine that there should be no hearsay come in, and also that there should be no mention of prior bad acts. But he said, I had no idea that they're going to actually talk about the gun. So who was supposed to do anything? The prosecution didn't do anything wrong. So the prosecution argued that, well, it wasn't really intentional by her. She was just kind of in the middle of the story and she just blurted it out. So let's not reprimand her. Let's not punish her. Let's not put her in contempt of court. That was number one that they were saying. But they're also arguing that the trial should continue. That nobody did anything wrong here. They didn't know. But here the defense is bringing up a very valid point, I think, which is once the jury hears that he bought a gun, it's very hard to just disregard that. It's very, very hard. But they're continuing with the trial, so we'll see what happens. Now, the one last issue that I want to talk about today is another very interesting issue that occurred with the jury. Because what happened here is that we had, if you notice, there's two prosecutors here that's doing most of the work. There's two prosecutors giving, there's no opening statements, but cross-examining the witnesses and directing the witnesses. And you also have an assistant prosecutor behind these two main prosecutors, and she looks like she's kind of helping out with the exhibits and paperwork and things like that. And that a lot of times happens in trials. You have somebody first chairing, second chairing, and then you have somebody just helping out with the exhibits and documents. So what happened here is that person, her name is Liz. Well, Liz, who's helping out with the exhibits, she was near the elevators with one of the defense attorneys, and all of a sudden she essentially walks right near two jurors and a marshal, and of course the attorneys right away start walking away, but the marshal says something like, "Thanks, Liz, we love you." So they didn't respond. Obviously, the prosecutor didn't respond. And the attorney walked away. And by the way, this happens a lot. This does happen where you may bump into a juror that's sitting on your case in a trial, and you just completely ignore them. That's standard practice, and that's exactly what the prosecutor did. The prosecutor didn't do anything wrong. But then what happened was that the prosecutor brought the matter up to the judge, which is exactly what you're supposed to do. There's one time, I had to say, just because the juror said good morning or something. So right away I just tell the judge, I just want to let you know that the juror said good morning. I want to put it on the record and just let everybody know I ignored them. And if anybody feels that there's any bias, we can discuss it. But that's what happened. But it was where the marshal said, "Thanks, Liz, we love you." So she brought it up to the judge, and the defense attorney said, "Fine, if that's what happened, it doesn't sound like there's anything too crazy to think that there's any crazy bias, so I'm okay with it." Well, the judge, said right away. He said to the U.S. Marshal, says, "Okay, you've got to make sure that this doesn't happen, and you got to make sure that no one's talking." And he gives a very cautionary instruction to all to the head marshal there. Don't let this happen. Now, what happened with this trial is that they continue the testimony of Lauren. Lauren was actually on the stand at that time. And they continue the testimony with Lauren. And then all of a sudden, the judge says, we have to take a little recess because I have to address an issue that just came to my attention. So everyone's just sitting there, okay, fine. So they dismiss the jury, and the jury walks out. And then the judge says to the attorney standing there, he says, well, I just got word that actually it wasn't the marshal who said that. It wasn't the marshal who said, thanks, Liz, we love you. It was actually one of the jurors. And I think it was one of the alternate jurors. It was one of the jurors who said, thank you, Liz, we love you. Well, that's a problem. So they brought the juror, and first they brought the marshal in, and they asked him, the judge asked him some questions under oath about what exactly happened, and he said what happened. Then they called the juror in, but we weren't able to see it. The judge said all the cameras have to leave the courtroom, so we weren't able to see it. But the judge told us afterwards that he did question the witness and questioned the juror, and he dismissed that juror for saying those words. She doesn't think that juror should sit as part of the jury, and that was probably the right move. So those are the interesting legal issues that came up in the Michelle Troconis trial so far. We'll continue following this. Please, if you haven't yet, subscribe, like the video, and we will see you next time.